how it'd be nice if we knew when we just had Nathan what we know now. Because as first-time parents, and you can't help it, I mean, it's just the way it is. You don't know anything. You really don't. I mean, you recognize that God has blessed you with this amazing little son, this little girl, and you're just so grateful, but you recognize also this child came with no instructions. And so consequently, what you do is just kind of everything that you know or think that you know to do, what seems right, what seems logical, just kind of figuring it out. But sometimes that doesn't work out very well. And you're doing what in your mind makes sense. You're doing in your mind what seems a logical thing to do. But then the child is still crying and you're still just exasperated in frustration. And so you wind up needing some help. Let me give you an example. Nathan was our only child that really took to a pacifier. And I had actually gotten him one, it was a Bubba Teeth pacifier. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but you maybe remember the Bubba Teeth. They made pacifiers for little kids that had these brown teeth going everywhere. It was wonderful. Anyway, Caroline hated it, but interesting, Nathan, of all of his pacifiers, he loved that one the most. Anyway, so he would have that, especially when he would go to sleep. He really appreciated having this. But as time wore on, it got to the point, to the place where it's time for the pacifier to go. And so we did what seemed logical, what seemed prudent, which was to just kind of not give it to him. We would take it out of his room, take it out of his crib. We would hide it somewhere just in case we needed it, and put him to bed and see if he can be okay without it. Well, he wasn't okay without it, and he would begin to cry, and with the broken English that he could speak at that point, as best he could say passy or pacifier, or whatever he said, and you would try to give him some time to kind of work that out, to cry it out, but it just wasn't working. And so finally, in exasperation, what we would do is to go get the pacifier and give it back to him for two reasons. One, we felt sorry for him, but secondly, we just wanted some peace and quiet here. Yes. Wish they had them in much bigger sizes now. Anyway. But that still did not accomplish the goal. We needed him to forego this pacifier. We needed him to not simply not use it. We needed ultimately to get him to the point where he didn't want one anymore. And so we had tried what we thought was right, what seemed prudent. We did everything that we knew that was in our tool belt, in our wheelhouse, and that didn't work. And so Caroline at this point talked to some friends of hers who had children. They were already parents, further along in this than we were. And one of them suggested what you ought to do is to take the pacifier and cut the bulbous end of the pacifier off. Not the whole thing, but just the end of it off, and then give it to him. That'll probably fix it. Well, I didn't know anything else, so she got this advice, she got this counsel, and that's what happened. She cut that off, and that night when Nathan goes to bed, we hand him, and I think both of us were in there that night, and we handed him this pacifier, and he gets it in his mouth, and you can tell immediately on his face, something's not right. And he's like, and then he spits it out, and he hands it to us, and he said, broke. But you know what? He never asked for a pacifier again. That cured him. That was the advice, that was the counsel we needed. We were doing everything that we thought was right, everything that seemed prudent, but in truth what we needed was some advice. What we needed was some counsel. Parents need that. Not simply first-time parents, but parents regardless need advice and need counsel, because we never get to the point and we never get to the place where we know everything. And I hope you understand that, yes, if you have children that are at home, you're a parent, but in truth, as long as you live, or until you kill your children, you're going to be their mom, you're going to be their father, and regardless of the stage in life that you or your children are in, simply stated, we still need some advice, we still need some counsel. And hopefully you're here today and you recognize this fact. We can find no greater counsel and we have no greater teacher than the Lord Himself. And I believe Jesus has given us some examples and has given us some principles that if we'll take these things to heart, get them in our mind, it's going to affect how it is that we're parenting regardless of our stage in the game. And quite frankly, there's a lot of carryover in these principles, not simply to parents. If you're here today, don't tune me out if you don't have kids, because still I believe there's application for us in this. But what is it that Jesus says? Look with me in Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15 to a familiar passage of Scripture, probably a familiar story for you. Luke chapter 15, and we're going to begin reading with verse 11. Luke chapter 15, verse 11, Jesus says, "A certain man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me.' So he divided to them his livelihood. Not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal or wasteful living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father and say to him, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." And we'll pick up the rest of the story in just a few minutes. But in this familiar story, in this parable, Jesus, I believe, is not on a variety of different levels communicating to us some principles, but in particular, I believe there's some principles that he communicates that have a lot of application for us as parents, regardless of where we are in the stage of parenting, regardless of the age of our children. And here's the first principle. Absolving consequences doesn't promote better choices. Absolving consequences does not promote better choices. Now, you're probably familiar with this story. If you've been in church for any length of time, especially if you've grown up in the church, you've heard this parable, this story of the prodigal son probably numerous times. But let's set the stage so that we're all on the same page. Jesus says there's a man, a father, and he's got 2 sons. And one day the younger son comes to him and he asks for his share of the inheritance. Well, when we hear inheritance, we think of that which we receive at the death of someone. That's how inheritance works for us. That was true then, except there was this additional caveat in the first century. And that was, if you were to be a beneficiary, what you could do in advance of the individual's death was to sell your share of the inheritance. Well, this father had 2 sons, and so the inheritance would be divided between the 2. The older son would get a double portion, or in this case 2/3, and the younger son would get 1/3. And what he then did essentially was to go out and say, listen, find whoever would be willing to take this deal, say something like this. Hey, at my father's death, I'm entitled to 1/3 of his estate, and that means this many acres, this many sheep, this many barns, this many whatever. I tell you what, I will sell the rights to that to you for $10,000. You pay me now, and at his death, all that becomes yours. And so he found someone that would take that deal. And he's gone to his father, and he asks in verse 12, give me the portion of good that falls to me. And so in essence, he's asking for permission to go ahead and sell his share of the inheritance. Now, the fact that the father does not stop this, does not refuse it, indicates that he granted that request and signs off on this. And on the surface, very much, you could say, it seems as though he's enabling this behavior of his son. Because, after all, he understands what the son is doing. This isn't wise. This isn't prudent. It's clear that he probably would suspect that once his son gets this wad of cash, he's going to just blow it. That's a colossally foolish thing to do, but he does not stop it. But what's noteworthy in what's going on in this parable that Jesus describes is not ultimately what the father does, but more specifically what the father does not do. First of all, he does not demand that the son stay at home. He doesn't say, listen, you have got to stay here, and you've got to stay here with this money so I can keep an eye on you. He doesn't do that. He does not demand that the son, once he has sold his share of the inheritance, that he not waste the money. He does not say, this is what you've got to do, and this is how you need to invest it. Furthermore, it's significant that when the father leaves home, when the son leaves home, the father doesn't do anything. He doesn't go out to get him. He doesn't go to try to bring him back home, to talk him, to coerce him, to force him to come back home. But secondly, when that famine strikes, he doesn't go and try to help him. He doesn't try to go and bail him out. He doesn't try to go say, here's $100, let's see if that can help you out a little bit. He doesn't do any of that. Now, you've got to think that all of those things would have been a temptation for this father, because like any normal father, this would have been a man that loved his son, that cared for him, and took no delight in his child's sufferings. I mean, only a cruel, heartless father is like that, and this is not a cruel, heartless father. He loved his son, and you've got to think there was absolutely a part of him that wanted to go and help, that wanted to go and stop some of this behavior, but he doesn't do any of that. It would have been very much a temptation for him to go up and clean up this mess created by the son, but he doesn't do that. He does not absolve his son of any of the consequences of his choice. But think with me for a moment, what would have happened if he had? What if he had gone to that far country and he demanded, you come back home now? What if he had gone to his son when the famine struck and he had become destitute and said, here's some money just to be able to get by? If he had in any way absolved the consequences, what would have happened? Well, in the life of the son, not very much. Because he didn't have a behavior problem, he had a choice problem. And absolving the consequences does not address the choice problem. It seemed that this father in his wisdom recognized my son doesn't have a stewardship problem, doesn't have a morality problem, doesn't have all these other things. Ultimately, he's got a choice problem, and absolving the consequences, it doesn't fix that. Let me give you a more recent example. A number of years ago at our former church in Charlotte, we had this lady that came and joined. And she was probably somewhere in her, I'd say, middle 50s. And she lived with her mother, who was in poor health, and she served as her mother's caregiver. And apart from Social Security and I guess disability, that was the only income that they had coming in. Anyway, she had been a member of our church for a few months, and she called me one day and asked me to come over. And I went over there, and she was just in tears, and she begins to show me these letters that she's received from Bank of America that they have begun foreclosure proceedings on this house. And she said, we're going to lose the house. We don't have anywhere to go. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know what's going to happen to my mom. I don't know where to turn. And she said, we've got to have $700 to be able to stop this. We've got to give that money to the bank to be able to save this house. Well, hearing that and seeing this paperwork that confirmed the need, I said, well, because of the amount, this is something I need to go run through the channels at church. And so I went back and I was able to talk to a number of our deacons, explain the scenario, share the need, and they said, okay, let's see if we can help them. So it was somewhere in excess of $700 that we paid to get the foreclosure proceeding stopped. So that fixed everything, right? Well, not at all. We paid that. That stopped the foreclosure proceedings. But it was probably 3 to 4 months later, she calls me again. And she begins to paint a scenario that is exactly like the one that occurred 3 to 4 months before. And she says, they have begun foreclosure proceedings again. I see the paperwork that confirms this. That's exactly what they're doing. The bank is going to take their house, and they're going to be left absolutely destitute. They're going to be left homeless. It seems that she has a financial problem. It seems that she has an economic problem. And when someone has a financial or economic problem, the solution is to throw money at it, right? Well, after that first experience, we came to recognize she didn't have a financial problem. It wasn't an economic problem. It was a choice problem. Because I asked her, I said, can I see your checkbook register for a few minutes? And she gladly got it out, and she showed it to me. And I began to look at their monthly expenses. And as I looked at those, I saw, among other things, not only did they have cable TV, but they had a high-tier cable TV package with movie channels. Now, if you're getting ready to lose your house, I guess HBO can stand for homeless box office, but that's what you're getting ready to live in, is a box. Anyway, so they're spending this inordinate sum on cable TV. Not only that, but to the phone company, there's a home line, and then there's this big cell phone bill. Well, both of them, they don't leave the house. What do you need a cell phone for? Let's get rid of that. And as I'm going through this, I'm even seeing contributions to the U.S. Olympic Committee. If you don't have any money, don't give to the Olympics. Actually, I would say don't give anything to the Olympics. Anyway, that's beside the point. It was just baffling to me. Here she is coming to me with what seems to be a financial problem, and it becomes absolutely implicitly clear this is not a financial problem, this is not an economic problem, this is a choice problem. And if we throw more money at this, we are not addressing the problem. All we're doing is kicking the can down the road. Absolving consequences doesn't make the situation better. If you have a child that is making bad decisions, a lot of times what we tend to do is to seek to address the behavior, to look at the symptoms, but fixing the symptoms doesn't address the problem. The father in his wisdom recognizes my son's got a choice problem. And absolving those consequences is not going to prompt him to make better choices, to make better decisions. Jesus, I believe, communicates an important application for us as parents, regardless of the stage of parenting that you're in, that absolving consequences doesn't promote or prompt better choices. But there's a second principle here, I believe, that's communicated, which is this. Not helping can be of greatest help. Not helping can be of greatest help. And in some ways, this is like a subset or a continuation of the first thought, but with a twist to it. In verse 13, we're told that the son, he has sold his share of the inheritance. So whatever amount of money that is, and it seems probable that this was a significant amount of money, especially for the day and the time. Not many days thereafter, probably a day or two pass, and he gets all his things together, and we're told that he journeys to a far country. He wants to get as far away from Dad and from his brother as he possibly can be. He wants to be his own man. He wants to do his own thing. He wants to have his own rules, doing whatever he wants, whenever he wants, with whomever he wants. And we're told that once he gets there, he wasted his possessions with prodigal living. Prodigal just means wasteful. It's as if this money was burning a hole in his pocket. And he begins, and he's not working, he's just spending this money down, 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 down. And he's partying like there's no end to this. And you've got to think he was spending a lot of money on booze. According to verse 30, he was spending money on prostitutes. He is absolutely living it up, and he's having what seems for a time the time of his life. He's doing whatever he wants. He's doing his own thing, and he's spending this money. He doesn't save a drop of it. And we're told that when he had spent all, the money is gone. Now he's got a problem. But according to verse 14, the problem gets worse because a severe famine struck the land. And you're aware that this in the first century would have been an agricultural society, and everything is contingent on, and the economy is very much based on crops and harvests, all these things coming in. And when this famine strikes, this drought strikes the land, well, the supply of everything becomes small. And when supply gets small, demand gets great, and so too do prices. And so what little money he might have had at this point, it can't afford him anything. He can't buy a loaf of bread. He can't buy a Twinkie. He can't buy anything. He is absolutely destitute. And we're told that at this point he joined himself to a citizen of that country. He goes to somebody and says, listen, I'll be your indentured servant. I'll do whatever you want. The guy says, well, I've got a job slopping pigs. Now, for a Jew, this would have been the height of dishonor to do something like this, but he had no other choice, and that's what he's doing. And he's looking at those pigs thinking, you know what, they've got even more to eat than I do. And he says in verse 16, or it says of him in verse 16, he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods, with the food that the pigs ate. But this is significant. Verse 16, at the end of it, it says, and no one gave him anything. No one gave him anything. That includes the people of that area. Nobody gave him some apples. Nobody gave him the butt ends of a loaf of bread, a leftover biscuit, a dry piece of toast. Nobody gave him a hot dog. can of potted meat. Nobody gave him anything. And not only did no one else give to him anything, it's of note that the Father doesn't come out to give him anything. Now, he would have absolutely been aware of the fact that the Son would have been very much and detrimentally affected by this famine, because it would have affected everyone in that area. But he doesn't go to him. He doesn't say, here's some money. He doesn't say, here's some food. He doesn't provide for him anything. Doesn't that seem so cold? Doesn't that seem so harsh? Doesn't it seem so brutal? No one is helping. Nobody gives him anything. Here's a guy who is in need. Here is somebody who's asking for help, but no one helps him. No one, including his own father, helps him. But I hope you understand, though, that by them not helping, that was the greatest help that he could have ever had. Why? Because it was only when he got to that point, it was only when he got to that place, when he absolutely reached rock bottom, we're told that he came to himself. He had one of those V8 moments. Finally, it's like the curtain has been rolled back. The lights come on, and he recognizes, man, I am making an absolute disaster of my life. Colossally bad, colossally foolish decisions and choices. No one helping him. His father not coming to his aid was the greatest help that this son could have ever had. Why? Because failure can be one of the greatest teachers, the greatest instructors and tutors that you or I or our children can ever have. In our previous house, we had a neighbor across the street. His name was George, and around his house and then throughout the yard, he had a number of shrub beds, even some out at his mailbox. And instead of putting like mulch, or instead of putting pine needles around those under the bushes, what George did was to put these little white rocks. And I don't know how many tons of white rocks he had scattered everywhere, but when Nathan was little, he loved to mess and play with those rocks. And so if I had him out in the front yard, he'd want to go across the street to George's house to mess with these rocks. Anyway, I was outside one day with him, and Caroline came out to join us, and we'd gone over to George's house, and Nathan is messing around with those rocks. And as that's going on, Caroline and I are just kind of talking, and I'm hardly paying attention, not to her, but I mean to Nathan. And so I always listen intently to everything. I hang on every word that Caroline says. Nathan grabs one of these rocks and he goes to put it in his mouth. And Caroline is kind of aghast at what she's seeing, and she says to me, aren't you going to tell him not to do that? And I said, he'll figure it out in a minute. So I didn't stop it. Nathan puts this rock in his mouth. He chomps down on it. All of a sudden, he makes this awful face, and the rock comes out. He discovered this tastes bad. This is really hard. This is no good for me. And you know what? He doesn't eat rocks anymore. Experiencing that was a far greater teacher than me saying, oh, don't do that. You ought not do that. That's not good. There's no benefit to be gained in that. And we need to recognize as parents, regardless of the stage that we're in particular, those of you who are parents of adolescent or young adult children, there's very much going to be a temptation to come in and bail kids out when they make bad decisions, to come in and rectify problems and to clean up messes and to absolve consequences. But I believe what Jesus, among other things in this parable, communicates is that not helping can be the greatest help that your child can ever experience, because in this case, it was only when he did not receive from others the help that he wanted that he finally came to himself. But there's a final principle, I believe, at work in this parable, and it's this. Your goal will determine your parenting. Your goal will determine your parenting. Well, the younger son has gotten to the point he recognizes, I have nothing. The lights have gone off on his mind. We're told in verse 17 that he came to himself, and he begins to think. And he's thinking, my father's hired servants. I mean, the hirelings, people that are not part of the family, they have enough bread to eat and to spare. I mean, they're able to eat a sandwich and there's more bread still looking at them. And here I am, I'm his son, and I've got nothing. I am literally starving. And so he declares his goal in verse 18, I'm going to get up, I'm going to arise, I'm going to go to my father, and I'm going to tell him, I've sinned against you and I've sinned against God. And I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Will you make me like one of your hired servants? So he's come to himself. He recognizes the absolute deplorable foolishness of his decisions. And he's going to go back home. He's going to tell his father. He's going to confess to him what he's done. So we're told that he begins to do that, and he begins to approach the house. And even though he's still seemingly some distance away from the house, the father, it seems, is out maybe on the porch looking out, and he sees this son off in the distance. Now, we don't know how long he's been gone. It might have been months. It might have been years. We don't know. But he sees him, and seeing him, immediately recognizes him and runs to him. It says that he had compassion on him. He ran and fell on his neck and he kissed him. He just embraces him. And this would have to be such a tear-filled, but the happiest of tears that the father is shedding. And the son says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called one of your sons. You know, honestly, I shouldn't be able to call you Daddy. Could maybe you bring me on as some hired help, just so I can earn a little bit? And it seems that the father, he's not going to hear any of this. In verse 22, the father says to his servants, bring out the best robe. I mean, get the finest robe. Get these rags off of him. Put the finest robe on him. Put a ring on his finger. Give sandals to him for his feet. Verse 23, he says to bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and we're going to have a big old barbecue. We're going to welcome. We're going to have this enormous party because my son that was lost has now been found. This one that had wandered has now returned. Well, this is not new territory for most of you. You're probably familiar with this story and how all of these events unfold. But I want you to think with me about this for a moment, and thinking about the story in wide view. Initially, when this youngest son leaves with his share of the inheritance, what does he do? He wants to get away from Daddy. He wants to get away from home. He wants to, it seems, be as far as he possibly can be from his father, from his rules, from all of that stuff. He wants to go and live it up. That's what the son wanted. But what did the father want for him? He wanted him to stay. He wanted him to be close. But understand this. More than anything, the father wanted the son to want that for himself. It's not simply, I believe, that the father wanted his son to do the right thing, the prudent thing, the wise thing. More than that, he desired that the son would actually want and desire that for himself. That was the right thing. That was the prudent thing. That was the best thing. But at that point, the son did not want it. The father could have demanded it. He could have sought to coerce it. He could have said, you're not leaving. You're not having the share of the inheritance. You're going to stay with me and you're going to like it or not. Doesn't make any difference. You're not going anywhere. But he doesn't do any of that. He wants him to be there. He wants him to be close. But more than that, he wants him to want that for himself. This comes to us as a parable from Jesus. Now, whether or not Jesus is telling this story and it was a true account of something that actually occurred, or just an illustration, a story that Jesus weaves to communicate a principle, we don't know. But one of the things that we do know is that all of the parables that Jesus gives, all of these are illustrations, and things in these stories represent or they stand for other things. Well, in this parable, what does the Father represent? Well, it takes a little imagination to recognize that Father is representative of our Heavenly Father. And the prodigal son, what is that representative of? What is this a type of? Well, a child of the Father that is intent on doing things their own way and drifting from and not being close to their Father, to their Heavenly Father. If I could take those two thoughts, that the Father in this parable wanted the Son to be with Him, to be close to Him of His own free will, take that thought and couple it with the fact that the Father in this story is representative of God. If you take those two thoughts together, I believe therein lies an important lesson for us as parents, for us in particular as Christian parents. And here it is. It ought to be our goal. It ought to be your goal as a parent to have children that know God and on their own want to be close to Him. That ought to be our goal. Now, that's not a desire that we can create. You can't make your child want to love Jesus. You can't make your child want to walk close with God. You can't make them want to do that. You can't create that desire, but what you can do is foster it. What you can do is to create an environment where that comes up as the natural outgrowth. If that's the case, my question for those of you who are parents, especially for those of us who still have children at home, is that your goal? Do you have that as a destination that you want your family to one day arrive at? I don't share this whatsoever to be super spiritual, to say, hey, look at me. I just want to say, here's an example of what I'm talking about. Caroline and I have had this conversation repeatedly. And we don't know what our children are going to wind up being like as they grow up. We have no idea what type of jobs or careers they're going to pursue. We don't know whether they're going to make a lot of money or not. We hope that they will so that we can be in a nice nursing home one day. But we don't know whether they will have names that are widely known, positions of inordinate influence. We don't know if they're going to excel in sports or athletics. We don't know if they're going to have large families or a family. We don't know any of that. And it's not that we're indifferent to those thoughts, but repeatedly we've talked about how ultimately none of that really matters to us. In truth, it doesn't matter to us if our boys wind up making an honest living digging ditches. It doesn't make any difference to us ultimately if Catherine makes an honest living as the cook at Waffle House. They have great hash browns. In truth, none of those things ultimately matter, but one thing that does matter to us. We want these little boys and this little girl to grow up to be men, to grow up to be women that know God and walk with Him. And everything else, yeah, we've got preferences and we've got personal hopes and all of those things, but in truth, none of those things matters. What ultimately matters is that they know Him and walk with Him. And because that is our goal, it affects how we parent. It affects what we do. Because of that, 5 days a week, our family has Bible study. Every single night, we pray with our kids. That our commitment to the church and things that are going on here, that trumps any other extracurricular activity. What I'm saying is, because that is our goal, it affects how we parent. You may not, as parents, have sat down and put pen to paper or even had formal conversation to say, well, you know, as parents, what is it that we have as a goal for ourselves relative to our children? But the truth is, though you might not have done that, you do have goals for your kids. You've got academic goals for them. I mean, you want them to excel in school. You want them to study and to make good grades. You want them to do well in school. In terms of athletics, if you have children that play sports, you have goals for them. You want them to do well in competition in whatever sport it is that they're participating in. You have goals for them in all of these areas. And because these are goals that you have, it affects what you do. Because you have academic goals for your children, you ensure that they go to school. You ensure that they do their homework. You hold them accountable for their grades. Because you have goals for them on the athletic field, you ensure that they go to practice. You ensure that they show up at those games. Because these are your goals, it affects how you operate. My ultimate question then for you today, Dad, on this Father's Day, for you, Mom, do you have as a primary goal for your children to know God and walk with Him? Do you have that as a primary goal? If not, let me ask you this. Why? Why? Because in truth, nothing else matters. It doesn't make any difference what law firm your child may one day be partner with, what diseases they may be able to cure, how much money they make, how many things that they have. If your children one day leave this world and are eternally separated from God, nothing else matters. Do you then have it as your goal that your children know Him and walk with Him? If it is your goal, my question is, does your parenting reflect it? Well, and if the answer is no, my question then is this: will you make it your goal? After all, your goal will determine your parenting. Won't you bow your heads with me? I recognize there's a whole variety of application in what Jesus says here to affect people across the age spectrum, the gender spectrum, whether you're a parent or whether you're not. But ultimately, the greatest application for this is for parents, for moms and for dads. And maybe some of you are here today as parents of young children, where the opportunity to influence and to foster an environment that leads to a goal is of greatest opportunity. For you, my question is, parents, as a mom or a dad, is that your goal? And how your parenting reflects whether it is or not. And I can't tell you whether it is, but the Lord and the power of His Spirit, your own mind and awareness can lead you to recognize that. And if the answer is unfortunately not, you can change that beginning to today. And I'm not suggesting that everything all of a sudden overnight changes, but you can begin a process where you begin to foster an environment where your children come to know Him, to love Him, and to walk with Him. Will you make that your goal? Will you ask God to give you the guidance and the wisdom that you need to be able to create that type of environment? Maybe you're here, though, and you don't have young children anymore. You've got adult, grown children. And when you read words like prodigal, you substitute the name of your son or your daughter. And you wish that you could make the decisions for your kids. You wish that you could make right the mess that they have made. Maybe you've been trying to do that. You've been telling them what to do. You've been bailing them out. You've been doing all of these things with the goal of trying to get them to the right point and place. But you recognize today what my child ultimately has is a choice problem, and I can't fix that. And I need help. I need the Lord to help me to not absolve consequences. In fact, I need His help to guide me to not help in such a way that they come to themselves. And maybe today you just want to pray for your child. Pray that God will return them back to you, draw them back to Himself. Maybe there's some other burden that you've got on your heart today that you just want to come and kneel at this altar and talk to God about. Perhaps it is that He's spoken to you maybe in Sunday school, or through a song that was sung, or something even through the truth of His Word that leads you to recognize, hey, I don't have a personal relationship with Him. I don't know that I can call Him my Heavenly Father. If you'd like to know how you can experience that, will you just step out from where you are when our invitation begins? Let me begin a conversation with you so that you can come to know and discover that. Perhaps He's leading you to become a part of this church family. However He's speaking, my encouragement is for you just to obey. Lord, thank You for revealing to Yourself to us and presenting Yourself to us not as some dictator, not as some ogre, but as a Father that loves, that sacrifices. You've given to us the greatest example of what parenting can look like. And even through Your own words, You have given us counsel that You want to use to impact how it is that we raise our own children. God, as You've spoken to our hearts today, You've shown us things that we need to change, perhaps decisions that we need to make. And however, Lord, that You've spoken, I pray that our response now might be characterized as obedience to Your direction. That's our prayer. We commit this time of decision to You in Jesus' name. Amen.